$499,000. That is the exact price my mother put on my existence, emailing the itemized bill to our entire family board on Thanksgiving morning. She titled it, Cost of Raising a Failure, thinking her petty spreadsheet would shame me into surrendering my inheritance. Big mistake. While she spent 2 weeks inventing expenses, I spent 5 years as a forensic auditor gathering evidence to put her behind bars. She wants to talk numbers? Fine, let us talk numbers. My name is Amara Kingswell, and I was exactly 29 years, 3 months, and 4 days old when my mother decided to invoice me for the privilege of being her daughter. I was sitting in my cubicle at Veridian Analytics on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. The air conditioning was humming its usual low, sterile drone, a sound that usually helped me focus. On my dual monitors, I had a labyrinth of bank statements from a shell company in the Cayman Islands. I was hunting for a discrepancy of $3 million that a certain hedge fund manager thought he had cleverly hidden in a series of charitable donations to a non-existent Beagle Rescue Foundation. This was my life. I was a senior forensic auditor, to the uninitiated. That sounds like a boring accountant who likes math too much. In reality, I was a financial bloodhound. I did not just count money. I traced the digital fingerprints of greed. I found the secrets people thought they had buried under layers of complex tax codes and offshore accounts. Then, the notification pinged. It was not a work email. It was a personal notification, but it arrived with the heavy red flag priority that usually signaled a subpoena. I glanced at the bottom right corner of my primary screen. Sender: Madeline Kingswell. Subject: Cost of raising a failure. Invoice attached. CC: The Board of Directors, Kingswell Enterprises, Beatrice Kingswell, Julian Kingswell, Serena Kingswell, 52 other recipients. My fingers hovered over the mouse. For a second, the office noise, the clicking of keyboards, the low murmur of the partners discussing lunch options faded into a dull buzz. She had copied the board. She had copied the entire extended family, Great Aunt Martha, who was 92 and probably thought this was a virus, Cousin Edward, who I had not spoken to since he tried to sell me a timeshare in Florida, and, of course, Grandmother Beatrice. I clicked open the email. There was no body text, no Dear Amara, no I hope this finds you well, not even a passive-aggressive per our last conversation, just the attachment. A single Excel file titled Amara_debt_final ... XLSX ... I opened it. You have to admire the sheer amount of time Madeline Kingswell must have wasted on this. It was a masterpiece of pettiness. The spreadsheet was color-coded. Expenses were categorized by year. Starting from 1997, the year of my birth, row 4. Column B, hospital delivery fees, epidural included. Cost, $12,500, row 52. Column B, formula and diapers, premium brand. Cost, $3,200. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the data with the same cold, analytical detachment I used for embezzlement cases. She had itemized everything. There were rows for school uniforms, rows for piano lessons I had begged to quit, rows for the braces I wore from age 12 to 14. She had even included a line item for food and utilities, 18 years, calculated at a flat rate of $800 a month. But then, it got personal. Row 310, legal fees for shoplifting incident, age 16, cost, $5,000. I paused. That shoplifting incident involved a pack of gum I had accidentally put in my pocket while distracted by Serena screaming at a sales clerk. Mom had insisted on hiring a high-profile criminal defense attorney to make it go away, mostly to protect the family name, not me. Row 400, emotional damage caused by refusal to marry Senator Sterling's son. Cost, $50,000. I almost laughed out loud. The office was quiet, so I stifled it into a cough. Emotional damage. She was charging me $50,000 because I refused to be a political prop for a man who thought foreplay was discussing his golf handicap. I scrolled to the very bottom, to the bolded, double underlined total cell. Total owed $499,000.42. $499,000. That was the value of my life to her. That was the price tag she had slapped on my forehead. It was a calculated insult, designed to look like a legitimate debt. My phone, sitting face down on my desk, began to vibrate. It buzzed once, then twice, then erupted into a continuous spasm of notifications. I flipped it over. Serena, sister. LOL. Mom finally did the math. Better start selling your organs. Sweetie, or maybe that cheap car of yours? Serena, sister. Daddy is crying in the study. Mom is on her third martini. Happy Thanksgiving. I swiped the notifications away without replying. I could picture Serena right now. She would be lounging in the solarium of the $6 million brownstone in the Upper East Side that Mom and Dad had bought for her fashion startup headquarters. She was probably wearing a silk robe that cost more than my monthly rent, sipping a green juice, and delighting in my public execution. Serena was the golden child, the artist, the visionary. She had launched 3 fashion lines in 5 years, and every single one of them had hemorrhaged money. But whenever Serena lost $1 million, Mom called it market research, or building brand identity. When I took a student loan to get my master's degree in accounting because they refused to pay for a servant's education, I was being selfish. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I looked around my office. My workspace was small, functional, and mine. I paid the rent on my 400-square-foot studio apartment in Brooklyn. I paid for my own subway pass. I paid for my own takeout. I had not taken a dime from the Kingswell fortune since the day I walked out of that house at 22. And yet, here was a bill for $500,000. Why now? I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, interlacing my fingers. The email was not just a tantrum. Madeline Kingswell did not throw tantrums. She launched strategic strikes. Sending this to the board of directors was a specific move. Then it hit me. The annual shareholder meeting was in 2 weeks. Grandmother Beatrice was turning 80. By the bylaws of the Kingswell Trust, when the matriarch hits 80, certain voting rights are redistributed among the direct descendants. As long as I held my shares, I had a vote that could block Mom's plan to liquidate the family's real estate holdings in the Hamptons, a project she had been pushing for years so she could reinvest in Serena's failing empire. She was trying to humiliate me into submission. She wanted me to panic. She expected me to see this bill, feel the crushing weight of familial shame, and come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. She wanted me to trade my voting rights for the cancellation of this absurdity. She thought I was still the scared little girl who cried when she yelled. She thought I was just a low-level accountant crunching numbers for a paycheck. She had forgotten who I really was. She saw a daughter who failed to marry rich. I saw a fraudulent invoice, and nobody, absolutely nobody, sends a fraudulent invoice to a forensic auditor. I did not cry. I did not call my father, who I knew would be too weak to pick up the phone anyway. I did not reply to the email with an angry rant. Instead, I reached for my mouse and minimized the work I was doing for the Cayman Islands case. I opened a separate, encrypted drive on my hard drive. It was password protected with a 20-character key that changed every week. I typed it in. The folder opened. The folder was named Project Doomsday. Inside, there were subfolders organized by year, just like Mom's spreadsheet, but my folders did not contain receipts for diapers or braces. Folder 2021, Tax Evasion Evidence, Shell Company Alpha. Folder 2022, Serena's Business Trips versus Actual Vacation Logs. Folder 2023, The Charity Gala Embezzlement. Folder 2024, Offshore Accounts, Panama Link. Folder 2025, Madeline's Gambling Debts Disguised as Consultant Fees. I had been collecting this since I was 24. At first, it was just a coping mechanism. When I visited home and saw a new Renoir painting on the wall that I knew they could not afford based on the reported quarterly earnings, I would dig a little, just to see. It was professional curiosity, but over time, it became an arsenal. I opened the file labeled master_ledger.xlsx. I compared her bill to my ledger. She claimed I owed her $499,000, according to my calculations, based on the money she had siphoned from my trust fund, the loans taken out in my name without my consent, and the tax fraud implicated using my Social Security number when I was a minor. The number was quite different. She wanted to talk about what was owed? Fine. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Saturday, November 24th. Grandmother Beatrice's 80th birthday party. The grand gala at the Kingswell estate. Everyone would be there. The board, the investors, the press, the entire social circle of New York City. It was the perfect stage. Madeline expected me to stay away. She expected me to hide in my Brooklyn apartment, shamed into silence by the public airing of my cost. She thought the email was a wall that would keep me out. She was wrong. It was an invitation. I picked up my phone and typed a single message to my assistant, who sat 3 desks away. I will be taking a personal day on Friday. I have a family event to prepare for. Then, I opened a new browser tab. I did not look for a lawyer. I did not look for a therapist. I went to the website of a high-end designer rental service. If I was going to war, I needed armor. I needed a dress that said I was not the poor relation. I needed a dress that looked like it cost more than Serena's entire fall collection. I found it. A blood-red silk gown, sharp at the shoulders, plunging at the back. It looked like a weapon. I booked it. My mother thought she had dropped a bomb on me. She thought she had defined my value with a spreadsheet. But she had made a critical error. She assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. She assumed that because I worked with numbers, I was boring. She forgot that numbers are the most dangerous things in the world if you know how to read them. Numbers do not lie. People lie. Mothers lie. But the math? The math always checks out in the end. I stared at the total on her invoice again. $499,000. I whispered to the empty air of the office. Receipt received. Mother. I closed the spreadsheet. I did not delete it. I saved it into the Project Doomsday folder. Right next to the scan of a forged signature on a bank loan from 2 years ago, the game had changed. She wanted to play Cost of Raising a Failure? I was ready to play Cost of Being a Criminal. I checked the time. It was 5:30 in the afternoon. The sun was setting over the Hudson River, casting long, sharp shadows across the city. The concrete jungle of New York was turning a deep, bruised purple. Somewhere uptown, in a mansion that smelled of lilies and old money. My mother was probably toasting to her victory, thinking she had finally cut the dead weight loose. She was probably laughing with Serena, planning how they would spend the extra dividend money once I signed away my rights. They had no idea. I packed my laptop bag. I took the encrypted drive and slipped it into the inner pocket of my blazer. Right against my heart. It felt heavy, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of truth. I walked to the elevator, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the marble floor. Click, clack, click, clack. It sounded like a countdown. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the Viridian office, I caught my reflection in the polished metal. I did not look like a victim. I did not look like a failure worth $499,000. I looked like an auditor conducting a final review, and I was about to close the books on the Kingswell family for good. I was going to that party, and I was bringing the receipts. The road to the Kingswell estate was paved with asphalt that seemed smoother than anywhere else in New York, winding through a tunnel of ancient oaks that had stood long before my family decided they were royalty. My 10-year-old Honda Civic rattled violently as I hit 60 miles an hour, the vibration humming up through the steering wheel and into my bones. It was a stark, noisy contrast to the hushed purr of the limousines that usually glided up this driveway. I turned the radio off. I needed the silence. I needed to hear the ghosts. Driving back to the place where I grew up always felt less like a homecoming, and more like re-entering a crime scene where I was the only witness who refused to recant. The landscape blurred past, green, manicured, expensive, and with every mile marker, the years peeled back. I remembered my college graduation day. It was a humid afternoon in mid-May. the kind that made your gowns stick to your back. I sat in a sea of violet caps, scanning the bleachers while the dean droned on about the future being ours to shape. I was graduating summa cum laude with a double major in accounting and mathematics. It was not a subjective achievement like art or fashion. It was an objective, undeniable conquest of hard work. I looked for the wide brim of my mother's hat or the flash of Serena's signature oversized sunglasses. They were not there. 2 days before the ceremony, Serena had suffered what she called a creative crisis. She claimed the light in New York was suffocating her aura, and that she needed the azure hues of the French Riviera to design her next collection. So, Mother took her to Saint-Tropez. They sent a card. It arrived 3 days late with a generic printed message. "Congratulations on your studies." I remember walking across the stage, shaking the dean's hand, and hearing a lone, stifled cheer from the very back row. It was my father. He was hiding behind a pillar, wearing a trench coat despite the 80-degree heat. Looking like a spy in his own life, he had lied to Mother, told her he had a board meeting in the city, just to watch me accept my diploma for 10 seconds. Afterward, in the parking lot, he hugged me so hard I felt the tremble in his hands. He slipped an envelope into my pocket. Cash. Always cash. Untraceable. And whispered that he was proud before darting into his car and speeding away as if he were fleeing a heist. I used that money to pay the interest on the student loans I had taken out, because the Kingswell Family Trust apparently did not cover degrees that involved actual work. That was the financial dichotomy of my life. The ledger of favoritism was balanced with brutal inequality. Serena had received a seed investment of $2 million for her first clothing line, Serena K., which consisted mostly of beige sacks that retailed for $600. It folded in 18 months. Mother called it a learning curve. Then came the organic dog food venture, which cost another $500,000 and resulted in a lawsuit from a poodle owner in Connecticut. Mother called that bad luck. Then there was the avant-garde art gallery in Chelsea that never actually opened because Serena did not like the lighting fixtures. That was another $300,000 down the drain. I calculated it once. The amount of money my parents incinerated on Serena's whims could have funded the entire accounting department of my university for a decade. Meanwhile, when I asked for assistance with my tuition, Mother looked at me over the rim of her porcelain teacup and said that struggle builds character. She told me that since I chose such a pedestrian career path, I should learn to live like a pedestrian. But it was never really about the money. The money was just the weapon. The motive was something far more visceral. Mother hated looking at me. She never said it outright, but I felt it in the way the air left the room whenever I entered. She used to tell guests that I had unlucky eyes. She would say it with a light, tinkling laugh, as if it were a charming anecdote. "Don't look at Amara too long," she would joke. "She sees things that aren't there." She was right. In a way, I did see things. I saw the cracks in the foundation that everyone else was paid to ignore. I was 16 years old when I first realized that the numbers in my house did not add up. I was sitting in the library, doing my calculus homework, when my father left his briefcase unlocked on the mahogany desk. He had gone to refill his scotch, a habit that started at noon and ended when he passed out. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in a house built on secrets. I opened the leather satchel. Inside, there were quarterly reports for Kingswell Enterprises. To anyone else, they were boring columns of figures. To me, they were a narrative. I saw a transfer of $50,000 to a consulting firm that, upon a quick search on the library computer, did not exist. I saw write-offs for charitable donations to organizations that had lost their nonprofit status years ago. I saw the hemorrhage. I walked into the kitchen, holding the report, innocent and naive, and asked my father why we were paying a landscaping company in Nevada when we lived in New York. The color drained from his face. He snatched the paper from my hand, his voice shaking, and told me never to touch his things again. But later that night, I heard Mother screaming at him behind their bedroom doors. She was not screaming about the fraud. She was screaming that he was careless enough to let me see it. "She has the devil in her," I heard her hiss. She is watching us. Julian, she is always watching. That was the moment I became the enemy. Not a daughter, but a liability. The resentment simmered until the night of my 18th birthday, or rather, the night of the Kingswell annual spring ball, which happened to fall on my birthday. I was not the guest of honor, I never was, but I was allowed to attend. I had saved my allowance for 6 months to buy a dress. It was vintage, a pale emerald silk that shimmered like water. For the first time, I felt beautiful. I felt like I might actually belong in this world of glitz and glamour. I laid the dress out on my bed and went to take a shower. When I came back, the room was silent. The dress was on the floor. It had not just been torn, it had been executed. The silk was slashed methodically from the neckline to the hem in jagged, violent ribbons. It looked like an animal had clawed through it. I stood there, water dripping from my hair, staring at the ruin of the only beautiful thing I owned. Then, I saw Serena standing in the doorway. She was holding a pair of fabric shears, the silver blades glinting under the chandelier light. She was not hiding them. She was smiling. It was a cold, satisfied smile, devoid of any madness, which made it terrifying. She looked at me and said, "Oops, I thought it was a rag." I dragged her downstairs, screaming, clutching the shredded silk in my hands. I burst into the drawing room where Mother and Father were having drinks with the event planner. I threw the dress on the floor and pointed at Serena, who had followed me down with a look of feigned shock. "Look what she did!" I screamed. "Look at it!" Mother did not look at the dress. She looked at me. Her face hardened into a mask of disgust. She set her drink down and walked over to me, her heels clicking sharply on the parquet floor. She slapped me. It was not a hard slap, but it was precise. It stung more than the cut on my heart. "Stop this theater, Amara," she said, her voice ice-cold. "We all know you cut that dress yourself." I gasped, choking on the injustice. "What? Why would I do that?" "For attention," Mother replied smoothly. Turning back to the event planner, "She is incredibly jealous of her sister. She knew Serena looked stunning tonight, so she destroyed her own dress to make a scene. It is a sickness, really. We are thinking of sending her to therapy." I looked at my father. He was staring into his glass of amber liquid, swirling the ice, refusing to meet my gaze. He knew Serena was cruel. He knew I had saved for months, but he said nothing. He chose his peace over my truth. That night, I did not go to the ball. I sat in my room, wearing a pair of old jeans, and I made a decision. I realized that in this house, the truth did not matter unless you could prove it. Words were wind, tears were weakness. The only thing that held weight, the only thing that could not be gaslit or slapped away, was evidence. I went to my computer. I did not cry. I opened a new folder. That was the birth of Project Doomsday. It did not start as a grand plan for revenge. It started as a survival mechanism. If they were going to lie about me, I was going to know the truth about them. I started small. I scanned the receipt for the fabric shears Serena had bought on Father's credit card the day before. I saved the email where Mother instructed the house staff to ignore my complaints. Over the years, the scope grew. I stopped looking for petty grievances and started looking for felonies. I treated my family like a hostile corporate entity under audit. When I went home for holidays, I was not visiting. I was conducting fieldwork. I learned to pick locks. I learned to crack passwords. I learned that my mother's vanity was her biggest security flaw. She used her own birthday for everything. I drove the Honda Civic through the massive wrought iron gates of the Kingswell estate. The security guard, a man I did not recognize, hesitated before raising the bar. Eyeing my battered car with suspicion until I flashed my ID. "Welcome home, Miss Kingswell," he said, though his tone suggested I was anything but welcome. I drove up the long, winding path. The mansion loomed ahead, a sprawling beast of stone and ivy, lit up like a fortress against the darkening sky. The driveway was already filling with Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the ocean salt from the nearby coast. My stomach tightened, a reflex from years of conditioning, but I forced my breathing to slow. I was not the 18-year-old girl with the slashed dress anymore. I was not the graduate searching for a face in the crowd. I was a professional. I parked my car between a sleek red Ferrari and a vintage Jaguar, the rust on my bumper almost touching the pristine paint of the luxury machines. It was a poetic placement. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up the garment bag containing the red dress I had rented. I patted the pocket of my blazer where the USB drive sat warm against my side. My father had slipped me cash to hide his shame. My mother had written a bill to monetize her disdain. Serena had destroyed my property to feed her ego. They thought the past was buried under checkbooks and non-disclosure agreements. They thought they could edit the narrative of my life just like Mother edited her social media photos. But they forgot that I kept the originals. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots. I looked up at the lit windows of the ballroom where the music was already starting to play. I could see the silhouettes of the guests moving inside, a dance of shadows. I am here. Mother, I thought, my hand tightening on the garment bag, and I have brought my own invoice. I walked toward the front door, not as a daughter returning to the fold, but as a storm making landfall. The heavy oak doors of the Kingswell Manor swung open, unleashed by a butler whose face was as starched and impassive as his collar. I stepped over the threshold and into the foyer, a cavernous space dominated by a crystal chandelier that cost more than the average American home. The air inside was different from the crisp November chill outside. It was heavy, perfumed with the scent of white lilies and expensive desperation. The house was buzzing. Waiters in white tuxedo jackets glided through the hallways carrying silver trays of champagne, moving with the synchronized efficiency of ants. The guest list for Grandmother Beatrice's 80th birthday was a roll call of New York's elite. I recognized a senator shaking hands near the coat check and a tech mogul laughing too loudly by the grand staircase. This was not a family gathering. It was a merger of influence and ego, masquerading as a celebration. I had barely taken 2 steps onto the marble floor when a shadow detached itself from a group of socialites and glided toward me. "Amara, darling, you made it!" The voice was high, melodic, and sickeningly sweet. My mother, Madeline Kingswell, descended upon me with arms wide open. She was wearing a floor-length gown of midnight blue velvet, diamonds dripping from her ears like frozen tears. To the onlookers, she was the picture of a doting matriarch welcoming her wayward daughter. She pulled me into a hug. The embrace was tight, suffocating. I could smell her perfume, Chanel No. 5 and gin. She pressed her cheek against mine, posing for an invisible camera, and her voice dropped to a register that only dogs and unwanted children could hear. "I hope you brought a cashier's check," she hissed into my ear. "If you make a scene tonight, I will have security throw you out onto the street before you can finish your first drink." She pulled back. Beaming, her hands lingered on my shoulders, her nails digging into the fabric of my blazer. "Look at you," she said loudly, smoothing a wrinkle on my lapel that did not exist. "Always so practical with your fashion choices." "Good to see you too, Mother," I said, my voice steady. "You look expensive. And you look like you work for the IRS, a voice drawled from the staircase. I looked up. Serena was descending the grand staircase, one hand on the banister, the other holding a flute of champagne. She looked like a vision of excess. She was wearing a custom silver dress that clung to her body like liquid mercury. Around her neck sat a diamond necklace that was thick enough to choke a horse. It was new. I knew every piece of jewelry in the family vault, and this was not one of them. Serena stopped on the bottom step, looking me up and down with a sneer that she didn't bother to hide. "Seriously, Amara, it is Grandmother's 80th. Could you not have found something that doesn't scream middle management?" "I came straight from work." "Serena," I lied. "Some of us actually earn our paychecks." "Work," she scoffed, taking a sip of her drink. "Checking receipts? How thrilling. I suppose you are going to audit the hors d'oeuvres?" "Girls," Mother warned, her smile never wavering. Not tonight. Tonight is about Beatrice. Speak of the devil. And the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. At the top of the stairs, the crowd parted. Grandmother Beatrice Kingswell appeared. She was seated in her antique wheelchair, though everyone knew she could walk perfectly fine when she wanted to. She used the chair because it forced people to bend down to speak to her, a power dynamic she enjoyed. She was 80 years old today, but she looked ageless in a terrifying way, like a statue carved from granite. Her white hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes, sharp and black, scanned the room like a hawk looking for a field mouse. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply stared. Her gaze landed on me. I straightened my spine. Beatrice Kingswell did not respect affection. She respected strength. If I looked away, she would eat me alive. I held her gaze for 5 long seconds until she gave a barely perceptible nod and motioned for her nurse to push her toward the ballroom. "She is in a mood," Serena whispered, rolling her eyes. "She hates the flowers. She says they smell like a funeral." "Perhaps she is right," I murmured. "Julian," Mother snapped, turning her head sharply. "Get over here." My father emerged from the library, looking like a man marching to the gallows. He wore a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, but he wore it with the posture of a defeated man. He held a tumbler of scotch in his hand, his knuckles white around the glass. When he saw me, his eyes softened. For a second, just a fraction of a second, I saw the father who used to sneak me candy bars and read me stories. He took a step toward me, his mouth opening to speak. Then, he looked at Mother. Madeline did not say a word. She just arched one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. The message was clear. "Stay in line." Father stopped. He swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He did not come to hug me. He did not ask how I was. He just gave me a tight, pained nod and turned to greet a wealthy donor who had just walked in. My heart hardened another layer. It was fine. I did not need his protection anymore. I had my own. "Come with me," Mother said, her grip on my arm tightening again. "We need to discuss the schedule for the evening before the guests fully settle in." "I thought I was just a guest," I said. "Do not be coy," she snapped. "Serena, entertain the senator. Amara, library, now." She dragged me toward the library, but as we walked through the hallway, my professional instincts kicked in. I could not help it. I was an auditor. I noticed details. I noticed inconsistencies. We passed the display case where the family's collection of Ming Dynasty vases usually sat. There were 3 of them, blue and white porcelain, dating back to the 15th century. They were insured for $200,000 each. I glanced at them as we walked by. The lighting was dim, designed to create ambiance, but I knew what to look for. The glaze on the center vase was too shiny. The cobalt blue was a shade too vibrant. Real Ming porcelain has a depth, a subtle imperfection in the firing. This was flat. It was a replica. A high-quality museum replica, maybe worth $500, but a replica nonetheless. I frowned. Why would they replace the vase? We turned the corner. Passing the wall where the original Turner painting, Storm at Sea, had hung for 40 years, it was still there, or at least, a painting of a storm was there. But as I passed, the light hit the canvas at an angle. The texture was wrong. It was too smooth. Oil paint cracks over time. It builds ridges. This surface was uniform. It was a giclée print on canvas, likely touched up with some clear gel to mimic brushstrokes. My mind started racing. The vase was fake. The painting was fake. I looked at Serena's new diamond necklace across the room. It sparkled brilliantly, too brilliantly. Real diamonds have a specific refractive index. They break light into fire and ice. These stones were throwing rainbows everywhere. Moissanite, high-end synthetic stones. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were liquidating. They were selling off the family assets and replacing them with forgeries to keep up appearances. The Kingswell fortune, the legendary wealth that Mother lorded over everyone, was a hollow shell. They were not just cash poor, they were stripping the copper wire out of the walls. Suddenly, the email made perfect sense. The bill for $499,000 was not just spite, it was desperation. They needed cash, fast. They were drowning, and they were trying to use me as a life raft. Mother shoved me into the library and slammed the heavy door, cutting off the noise of the party. The room was lined with books that nobody read. The air smelled of old paper and Father's scotch. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to a leather chair in front of the desk. I sat. I kept my hands in my lap, clasping them together to stop them from shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of my discovery. Mother walked behind the desk and opened a drawer. She pulled out a thick document and slammed it down in front of me. "This," she said, "is a formal acknowledgement of debt." I looked at the paper. It was a legal contract, drafted by the family lawyer. It stated that I, Amara Kingswell, acknowledged a debt of $499,000 to Madeline Kingswell for expenses incurred during upbringing, and that I agreed to repay this sum immediately. In lieu of payment, forfeit my voting shares in the Kingswell Family Trust. "You cannot be serious," I said, allowing a tremor to enter my voice. "Mom, this is insane. You cannot charge a child for being born." "I can do whatever I want," she said, leaning over the desk. Her face was twisted in a mask of ugly triumph. "You have been a leech on this family for 29 years. You took our food, our shelter, our name, and you gave nothing back. You became a boring little bean counter while Serena is out there trying to build a legacy." "Serena is bankrupting you," I wanted to say, but I didn't. Instead, I widened my eyes. I slumped my shoulders. I made myself look small. "I don't have that kind of money," I stammered. "I just pay rent. I have student loans." "I know you don't have the money," she sneered. "That is why Clause 4 is there. Read it." I pretended to read, though I had already scanned it. In the event of non-payment, the debtor agrees to transfer all Class A voting shares to Serena Kingswell. "You want my vote," I whispered. "That is what this is about. The board meeting. You want to sell the Hamptons estate." "We are restructuring," she corrected sharply. "And we need unanimity. Your grandmother is old, Amara. When she passes, the trust dissolves into individual holdings. If you hold your shares, you will just obstruct us with your petty caution. Serena needs capital to expand." "To expand what?" I asked softly. "Her collection of lawsuits?" Mother's hand slammed onto the desk. "Sign the paper, Amara. If you do not sign it tonight, I will ensure that grandmother writes you out of her personal will tomorrow morning. I have already told her that you have been stealing from us. Who do you think she will believe? Her daughter, or the granddaughter who never visits?" It was a lie. Grandmother was too sharp to believe Mother blindly, but the threat was designed to terrify me. I looked down at the paper. This was it, the pivot point. If I fought back now, if I showed my teeth, she would put her guard up. She would call the lawyers. She would shut down access. I needed her to think she had won. I needed her to be so confident, so arrogant, that she would parade her victory in front of the entire world. I let my lower lip tremble. I reached out a shaking hand and picked up the pen she had thrown on the document. "If I sign this," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "will you stop? Will you leave me alone?" Mother smiled. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered a wounded rabbit. Her eyes glittered with malice. "Sign it," she purred, "and you can go back to your little apartment and pretend none of us exist, until the next bill comes due, of course." I hesitated, the pen hovering over the paper. I breathed in a shallow, panicked rhythm. I looked at her, pleading with my eyes. "Please, Mom, don't make me do this." "Do it!" she hissed. I touched the pen to the paper. I did not sign my name. I made a squiggle that looked like a signature but was legally unrecognizable. In the heat of the moment, blinded by her own greed, she would not check. She just wanted the ink on the page. I pushed the paper toward her, She snatched it up, her eyes scanning the bottom line. She let out a laugh. A harsh, barking sound. "Finally," she said, tucking the document into a folder. "Finally, you are useful." She walked around the desk and patted my cheek. Her hand was cold. "Now, fix your face. You look pathetic. We are going out there, and you are going to smile. And when I announce the restructuring plan during the toast, you are going to clap. Do you understand?" "Yes. Mother," I whispered, staring at the floor. "Good." She checked her reflection in the mirror, adjusting a diamond earring. "Go to the washroom, wash your face, meet us in the ballroom in 10 minutes. And Amara?" I looked up. "Try not to look so cheap. It reflects poorly on me." She swept out of the room, leaving the door open. The sounds of the party drifted back in. Laughter, clinking glasses, a string quartet playing Mozart. I sat in the chair for a full minute after she left. I listened to her footsteps fade away down the hall. Then, the trembling stopped. I sat up straight. I brushed a piece of lint off my blazer. I looked at the spot where the fake Ming vase sat in the hallway. I looked at the empty space on the desk where the fraudulent contract had been. She thought she had broken me. She thought she had stripped me of my power. She had no idea that she had just confirmed everything I suspected: the replicas, the desperation, the frantic need for my shares. It all pointed to one thing. The Kingswell Empire was insolvent. They were not just corrupt, they were broke. I stood up. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was not the smile of a daughter. It was the smile of an executioner. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of the USB drive. "You want a show, Mother?" I whispered to the empty room. "I will give you a show." I walked out of the library, not toward the washroom, but toward the service entrance where I had stashed the garment bag with the red dress. It was time to change. The mouse was dead. The lion was coming out to play. The banquet hall of the saint. Regis was suffocating. Despite the cavernous ceilings and the aggressive air conditioning that kept the room at a crisp 65 degrees. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small hatchback, hung overhead, refracting the light into a dizzying array of prisms that danced across the faces of the assembled guests. There were over 100 people in the room, a sea of black ties, sequined gowns, and the distinct polished veneer of old money mixed with the hungry ambition of the new. I sat at the designated family table, positioned just to the right of the elevated stage. My hands were folded in my lap. Gripping the napkin so tightly, my knuckles had turned the color of bone. Beside me, Serena looked radiant in emerald silk, a color chosen specifically to complement her eyes, or so she had told the stylist 3 times that morning. She was sipping champagne with the casual elegance of someone who had never worried about a bill in her life. The hum of conversation was a physical weight. I could hear snippets of dialogue, laughter, the clinking of silver against fine china. It was the sound of my mother's world, a world where appearance was the only currency that mattered. Then, the lights dimmed, the spotlight cut through the darkness, landing on the center of the stage. My mother, Madeline, stood there. She was wearing a gown of crushed velvet, a deep crimson that made her look like royalty, or perhaps something more predatory. She held the microphone with a practiced grip, her nails manicured to sharp, red points. "Good evening, everyone," her voice boomed, amplified, and smoothed out by the sound system. She smiled, and from a distance, it looked warm. Only from my vantage point could I see the tightness in her jaw, the way her eyes scanned the room not with affection, but with calculation. "We are gathered here to celebrate the 80th birthday of the matriarch of our family, the woman who started it all, my mother-in-law, Beatrice." Madeline gestured to the head of our table. Grandma Beatrice sat in her wheelchair, dressed in a suit of dark navy wool. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply stared at Madeline, her face an unreadable mask of wrinkles and resolve. Her right hand rested on the white tablecloth, and her index finger tapped against the wood beneath the linen. Tap, tap, tap. It was a slow, rhythmic sound that was lost under the applause, but I could see the motion. It looked like a countdown. Madeline waited for the applause to die down. She lowered her head slightly, adopting a tone of somber humility. But tonight, as we celebrate longevity, I also want to talk about legacy, Madeline said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that demanded everyone lean in. I want to talk about the sacrifices we make for that legacy, the silent burdens we carry as mothers to ensure the next generation thrives. My stomach turned over. I knew that tone. It was the prelude to a strike. Raising children is not free, Madeline continued, pacing slowly across the stage. It is not just a labor of love, it is a labor of finance, of blood, of sweat, and of tears, and sometimes, in our desire to give our children everything, we forget to teach them the most important lesson of all, the value of $1, the value of gratitude. She signaled to the technician at the back of the room, behind her. A massive projection screen descended from the ceiling. The hum of the projector fan was audible in the sudden silence of the room. A harsh white light flooded the stage, washing out Madeline's features for a second before the image resolved. It was not a photo montage of Grandma Beatrice. It was not a collection of family memories. It was an Excel spreadsheet. The font was magnified so that even the people at the back tables, near the exit, could read the headers, the title, in bold, black letters. Read, "The Cost of Raising Amara." A ripple went through the crowd. It started as a low murmur, a collective intake of breath, and then evolved into the rustling of uncomfortable bodies shifting in expensive chairs. I felt the blood drain from my face, leaving me cold and lightheaded. "I believe in transparency," Madeline said, her voice regaining its strength. She pointed a laser clicker at the screen. A red dot danced over the rows and columns. "I believe that to truly appreciate what we have, we must understand what it costs to get us here. My daughter, Amara, has struggled to understand her place in this family. She has struggled with gratitude, so, as a mother, I decided to help her." She clicked a button. The spreadsheet scrolled down. "Every meal," Madeline recited, her voice echoing off the walls. "Every doctor's visit, every piece of clothing, every school trip, I have kept the receipts. I have tracked the investment, because that is what a child is. Is it not? An investment." She was smiling now, a terrible, beatific smile. She genuinely believed she was teaching a moral lesson. She was dissecting me, turning 18 years of my life into a cold, hard ledger, and she expected the room to applaud her thriftiness. "Let us look at some of the highlights," she said, and the cruelty in her voice was no longer hidden. It was paraded. The laser pointer landed on a line item dated 3 years ago. "Vehicle repairs, $3,500. Madeline read aloud. She looked down at me, her eyes locking onto mine. "Do you remember that, Amara? The night the front bumper of the family sedan was destroyed? You claimed you didn't know how it happened, but mothers always know. We pay for the mistakes you are too cowardly to admit." I stopped breathing. The memory was sharp and violent in my mind. It had been raining. Serena had taken the car without asking. She had come home smelling of vodka and peppermint gum, the front bumper hanging by a strip of plastic. She had cried, begged me not to tell, promised she would fix it. I had stayed silent. I had taken the screaming lecture from my father. I had taken the grounding. I looked at Serena. She was nodding solemnly, her face a portrait of sympathetic disappointment. She took a sip of water, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, playing the part of the dutiful sister who was saddened by my recklessness. "And here," Madeline continued, clicking to the next page, the crowd was silent now, but the atmosphere had curdled. It was no longer confusion. It was morbid fascination. They were watching a public execution. Legal fees, $5,000. She let that number hang in the air. $5,000. "For the incident at the boutique," Madeline said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. When items went missing, when the police were called, we settled it quietly, of course, to protect the family name, to protect you, Amara. My hands shook beneath the table. I remembered the boutique. I remembered waiting outside while Serena tried on clothes. I remembered the security guard grabbing my arm as we left, pulling a silk scarf out of my bag. A scarf Serena had slipped in there when I wasn't looking. I had screamed my innocence. Madeline had slapped me in the car and told me to stop lying. I paid for your freedom, Madeline said into the microphone. I paid to keep your record clean, and I never asked for a penny back. Until now. The murmurs in the room grew louder. I could hear words floating through the air. Ungrateful, troublemaker, poor Madeline. But I also saw other looks. A business partner of my father was frowning, looking at his watch. A cousin from the countryside looked horrified. Her hand over her mouth. Madeline didn't care. She was high on the power of the moment. She clicked to the final slide. The total sum appeared on the screen, bolded and underlined in red. Total debt, $342,751. This is the cost of your existence, Amara, Madeline said. This is the price tag of the roof over your head and the food in your stomach, and for years, you have walked around this house acting as if you were owed these things, as if you were entitled to my hard work. She reached into the podium and pulled out a document. It was thick, stapled on the corner. I am not a cruel woman, Madeline announced. I am a teacher, and tonight, the lesson is accountability. She walked down the steps of the stage. The spotlight followed her. She moved through the tables, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. She approached our table. She approached me. Amara, she said, her voice amplified by the wireless mic she was still holding. Stand up. My legs felt like lead. I pushed back my chair. It scraped against the floor. A harsh, grating sound. I stood up. The spotlight hit me, blinding and hot, and I couldn't see the crowd anymore, only the silhouette of my mother standing in the halo of light. She slammed the document onto the table in front of me. Beside it, she placed a heavy, gold fountain pen. This is a formal acknowledgement of debt, she declared, her voice ringing out to the back of the hall. If you have any shred of self-respect, if you have any desire to redeem yourself in the eyes of this family and these guests, you will sign this. You will acknowledge what you took. You will commit to paying us back, with interest, starting the day you turn 18. The room was deathly quiet. This was not a birthday party anymore. It was a tribunal. Sign it, Madeline hissed, stepping closer, the microphone picking up the wet sound of her breath. Show everyone that you are not a parasite. I looked down at the paper. The words swam before my eyes. Promissory note, principal sum, compound interest. I looked at Serena. She was watching me with a small, tight smile, her eyes glittering with triumph. She thought she had won. She thought this was the end. The moment I would finally break, cry, and beg for forgiveness for things I hadn't done. Then, I looked at Grandma Beatrice. She had stopped tapping her finger. Her hand was still. She was looking at me, her eyes clear and sharp as diamonds. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was the permission I didn't know I needed. The fear that had been gripping my throat for the last hour suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by something else, something cold, something hard. It was the realization that the woman standing in front of me was not my mother. She was my creditor, and her accounting was fraudulent. I did not pick up the pen. I looked at the document. Then I looked up at Madeline. I let the silence stretch out, let the tension build until it felt like the air in the room was about to snap. No, I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact. Madeline blinked. She pulled the microphone away slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. Excuse me? No, I said again, louder this time. My voice was steady. I will not sign your lies. Lies? Madeline laughed. A shrill, nervous sound. She gestured to the screen behind her. The numbers are right there. Amara, do not embarrass yourself further. The numbers are real, I said, my voice projecting without the aid of a microphone, fueled by a lifetime of silence. But the attributions are false. I reached into the small clutch purse I'd been holding. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of the object inside. You wanted a lesson in transparency, Mother, I said. You wanted to show everyone the truth about this family. You wanted to show everyone who owes what. I pulled out the USB drive. It was small, silver, and unassuming, but in the spotlight, it glinted like a knife. I think that is a wonderful idea, I said. I turned away from her. I walked past the document, past the gold pen, and past Serena, whose smile had just faltered for the first time all night. I walked toward the technician's booth at the back of the stage. Madeline stood frozen, the microphone hanging limp in her hand. She didn't try to stop me. She was too stunned by my defiance. She didn't know what was on the drive. She didn't know that while she was building a spreadsheet of lies, I had been building an archive of the truth. I handed the USB drive to the confused technician. Play it, I said. Play the file named Receipts. I turned back to face the crowd. The room was holding its breath. The spotlight swung back to the screen. The spreadsheet flickered and vanished, leaving the screen black for a heartbeat. The show was just beginning. The screen behind me did not flicker with the amateurish hesitation of a faulty connection. It transitioned with the sharp, resolute snap of a judicial gavel. The darkness that had swallowed Madeline's spreadsheet was replaced instantly by a background of stark, clinical slate gray. In the center of the screen, a single line of white text appeared, clean and sans serif. It was not a title, it was a definition. Fiduciary duty, the legal obligation of one party to act in the best interest of another. I stood at the podium where my mother had stood only moments before. The wood was still warm from her hands, but the air around it felt different now. It was no longer thick with the perfume of martyrdom. It was crisp with the ozone scent of impending judgment. I looked out at the sea of faces. 112 guests. I knew the count because I had checked the RSVP list while hacking the event server earlier that afternoon. They were waiting. The silence was not the stunned quiet of before. It was the hungry silence of a pack of wolves that smells a shift in the wind. My mother, Madeline, stood near the edge of the stage. Her mouth was open, a protest forming on her lips, but I did not give her the chance to speak. I tapped the spacebar on the laptop I had connected to the technician's console. You wanted to talk about costs, I said. My voice was calm, stripped of all tremor. I sounded like the accountants my father employed, the ones who came to the house in dark suits to discuss tax shelters. You calculated the cost of my food. You calculated the cost of my clothing. You even calculated the depreciation of a car I did not drive. That is fair. Accounting is a two-way street. I looked directly at Madeline. She took a step toward me, her heels clicking aggressively on the parquet floor. Get away from there, she snapped. She raised her microphone to her lips to drown me out. To regain control of the narrative, to bury me under another avalanche of motherly disappointment. This is inappropriate. You are ruining your grandmother's... She stopped. She tapped the microphone grill. Thud, thud. Nothing happened. The speakers remained silent. Madeline frowned, flipping the switch on the handle back and forth. She looked at the sound technician, her eyes widening in fury. The technician held up his hands in a gesture of helplessness. He was locked out. I had routed the audio control through the localized network I had established the moment I plugged in the drive. The only microphone that was live in this room was the one fixed to the podium, the one I was standing behind. Your microphone has been muted. Mother, I informed her. My voice boomed through the hall. Absolute and commanding. We are operating on my audit now, and in a proper audit. The defendant does not get to interrupt the findings. I hit the next key. The definition on the screen vanished. In its place, a high-resolution scan of a bank document appeared. It was old. The paper slightly yellowed in the scan. Dated 4 years ago, The header was unmistakable: the Beatrice Vane Education Trust. "Let us begin with the first asset," I said, using the laser pointer to circle the figure in the center of the document. "This trust was established by my grandmother, Beatrice. On the day of my birth, it was intended to cover university tuition, housing, and living expenses. It was a locked account, reachable only when I turned 18, or by the signature of a guardian in the event of an extreme emergency." I paused, letting the numbers sink in. "The principal sum was $150,000, I stated clearly. With compound interest over 17 years, the balance should have been nearly $210,000. I clicked again. A new document slid over the first. It was a transaction record from the First National Bank, dated exactly 3 years and 2 months ago. "This is a withdrawal slip," I explained. "It is for the entire balance of the account, $150,000, liquidated in a single afternoon. The reason listed on the affidavit is emergency medical expenses." A gasp rippled through the room. I saw my aunt clutch her pearls. I saw my father, Julian, stiffen in his chair, his glass of scotch pausing halfway to his mouth. He looked confused. He knew I had never been sick enough to require $150,000 in medical care. "I have never had surgery," I said, addressing the room's unasked question. "I have never been hospitalized for more than a day, so where did the money go?" I clicked to the next slide. The screen split. On the left was the withdrawal slip. On the right was a deposit record for a business checking account. The name on the account was Serena Vane Couture, LLC. The money was transferred directly into the operating account for my sister's first fashion startup. I said. I looked down at Serena. She was no longer nodding. She was pale, her mouth slightly agape, staring at the screen as if it were a ghost. The startup that failed within 6 months, the startup that produced nothing but 3 boxes of unsold t-shirts that are currently rotting in our garage. I leaned into the microphone. "That was not my money to give, Mother, and it was not yours to take. It was theft. Plain and simple." Madeline was shaking. She abandoned the dead microphone and marched toward the podium. Her face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She looked ready to physically drag me off the stage. "It was a loan!" she screamed, her voice shrill and thin without the amplification. "It was a family investment. You ungrateful little—" "Look at the signature." I cut her off, my voice thunderous over the speakers, drowning her out effortlessly. I clicked the remote. The signature line on the withdrawal slip zoomed in until it filled the entire 20-foot screen. It read, Amara Vane. "I was 14 years old when this was signed," I said. "I did not know this account existed. But more importantly, look at the slant of the A. Look at the loop on the V." I overlaid another image. A permission slip from my high school, signed by Madeline Vane. The handwriting was identical. The sharp, aggressive downstrokes, the way the pen dug into the paper at the end of the name. "You forged my signature," I said. I turned to look at her. She had stopped halfway to the podium, frozen by the colossal size of the evidence looming behind her. "You committed fraud against your own daughter to fund a vanity project for your favorite. That is a felony. Mother, in this state, forgery of a financial instrument carries a prison sentence of up to 5 years. The room was in chaos. The polite dinner conversation had evaporated. People were standing up. Chairs were being pushed back. The whispers were loud, angry, and directed entirely at the woman in the red velvet dress. "Is that true?" someone shouted from the back. It sounded like Mr. Henderson, the family attorney. "Madeline, did you sign that?" Madeline spun around, looking for an ally, looking for an escape. "She's lying. She's manipulating the images. It's a computer trick." "I am not done," I said coldly. I was not giving her time to recover. I was not giving the audience time to breathe. I had to bury her. I had to bury her so deep under the weight of her own greed that she could never climb out. "The trust fund was just the beginning," I continued. "Because once the money ran out, and Serena needed more for her next venture and her next vacation, You didn't stop spending. You just needed a new source of capital. I click the remote. Federal Student Aid, promissory note. The text on the screen was dense, but I highlighted the relevant sections in bright yellow. These are student loans, I said. Taken out in my name, subsidized and unsubsidized federal loans, plus 3 private loans from high-interest lenders. I read the numbers aloud, enunciating every syllable. $20,000, $15,000, $35,000. The dates correspond to the last 2 years. I looked at the crowd. I am a high school senior. I have not yet enrolled in university. I have not yet paid a single tuition bill, yet, according to the credit bureaus. I am currently $85,000 in debt. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Predatory lending, identity theft. It was financial abuse of the highest order. Where did this money go? I asked rhetorically. Did it go to my education? Did it go to tutors, books, a laptop? Slide change. A complex web of bank transfers appeared. It looked like a subway map, lines of green and red tracing the flow of digital currency. The funds were dispersed to a joint account held in my name and yours. Mother, I explained, tracing the line with the laser. An account I do not have the password for. From there, they were transferred to a shell entity called Vein Management Services. I looked at my father. He was standing now. His face was a terrifying shade of gray. He was a businessman. He understood shell companies. He understood that management services was often a euphemism for a slush fund. And from Vein Management Services, I said, clicking to the final node of the diagram, the money was used to pay off the credit card bills for this very banquet. The room erupted. You paid for your own grandmother's birthday party with stolen student loans taken out in your daughter's name? The voice belonged to Grandma Beatrice's younger sister, Aunt Clara. She stood up, her cane shaking in the air. Madeline, have you lost your mind? It's for the family image, Madeline shrieked, her composure shattering completely. She looked wild, her hair coming loose from its pins. We had to maintain appearances. Julian's business was struggling. We needed to show strength. I did it for us. I did it for all of us. You did it for yourself, I corrected her. You did it because you cannot bear the thought of not being the wealthiest woman in the room, even if you have to steal from your children to fake it. I turned back to the screen. But there is one last document. Father, and I think this one concerns you specifically. Julian Vane looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of what I was about to show him. He was afraid of how much he didn't know about his own wife. I brought up the final image of this sequence. It was a mortgage refinancing application for the family estate, a request to pull $300,000 of equity out of the house. The house is in both your names, I said to my father. It requires 2 signatures to refinance. I zoomed in on the signature line, Julian Vane. Dad, I said, dropping the formal tone for just a second to let the words sting. Did you sign this document on the 14th of February last year? Julian stared at the screen. He squinted. Then, slowly, he shook his head. No, he whispered. Then, louder. No, I was in Tokyo on business. I have the flight records. I was not even in the country. I know, I said. I checked your calendar. I turned the laser pointer back to the signature. That is not your handwriting. Dad, the loops are too wide. The pressure is too heavy. I moved the laser pointer to the witness signature line on the same document. Witness, Serena Vane. Serena witnessed the signature, I said. Looking at my sister, she was weeping now. Ugly, gasping sobs that ruined her makeup. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she had been caught. Serena watched our mother forge our father's signature to mortgage our home, and she signed her name to verify it. I looked at the total sum at the bottom of the screen. $300,000, I said. Gone. The equity in this house is gone. My college fund is gone. My credit score is destroyed before I have even left high school. I stepped back from the podium. I let the silence return, but this time it was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a verdict being delivered. You presented a spreadsheet claiming I owe you $342,000, I said to Madeline. But by my calculations, factoring in the theft of the trust, the fraudulent loans, and the interest accrued on the stolen capital, you owe me close to $400,000. I looked at the debt contract she had tried to force me to sign. It sat on the table, forgotten. I think, I said, my voice cold and final, that we are going to need a new repayment plan. Madeline lunged. It was a desperate, animalistic movement. She rushed the stage, her hands clawing for the laptop, for the cables, for anything to stop the flow of truth. She wanted to tear the screen down. She wanted to tear me down, but she never made it. Sit down, Madeline. The voice was not mine. It was not my father's. It came from the head of the table. It was low, raspy, and filled with a power that age could not diminish. Grandma Beatrice had rolled her wheelchair back from the table. She was no longer tapping her finger. She was pointing it, and she was pointing it directly at my mother. Madeline froze. She looked at the old woman, her eyes wide with terror. "You have spoken enough for one night," Beatrice said. She turned her gaze to me. For the first time in 18 years, she looked at me not with indifference, but with recognition. She nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Continue, child," Beatrice commanded. "Show us the rest." I turned back to the laptop. My hands were steady. The firewalls were down. The enemy was exposed, and I had not even opened the folder labeled Serena. "Gladly," I said. The silence that followed my grandmother's command was heavier than the velvet drapes hanging over the ballroom windows. It was a silence that carried the weight of 18 years of secrets, suddenly exposed to the harsh, unforgiving light of forensic accounting. I did not look at my father, whose face had gone from gray to a sickly, ash white. I did not look at my mother, who was trembling with a mixture of rage and terror, held in place only by the piercing gaze of the woman in the wheelchair. I looked at Serena. My sister was still crying, but the tears had changed. They were no longer the performative, glistening dewdrops she used to manipulate our parents or get out of speeding tickets. These were ugly, jagged tears of panic. She was dabbing at her face with a napkin, smearing her mascara into black streaks that made her look like a broken doll. She caught my eye, and for a second, the fear in her expression hardened into hatred. She mouthed a word at me, silent and venomous. "Bitch." I didn't flinch. I simply turned back to the laptop and pressed the arrow key. The screen refreshed. The complex web of my father's mortgage fraud vanished, replaced by a sleek, pastel-colored logo, Serena Vane Couture. "We have discussed the cost of my existence," I said, my voice echoing through the banquet hall, calm and clinical. "Now, let us discuss the cost of Serena's success." I walked around the podium, moving closer to the edge of the stage. I wanted to be sure everyone could see me. I wanted to be sure there was no barrier between the truth and the audience. "For the last 5 years, we have been told a story," I began. "A story about a prodigy, a young fashion mogul who, at 22, was running a profitable design house. We have seen the magazine covers. We have seen the interviews where my mother praises Serena's business acumen. We have seen the awards on the mantelpiece." I clicked the remote. A graph appeared. It had 2 lines. One was bright red, plunging downward at a steep, terrifying angle. The other was a flat, green line that hugged the bottom of the axis, barely registering a pulse. "This is the 5-year profit and loss statement for Serena Vane Couture," I announced. "The green line represents revenue from actual sales," I explained, pointing the laser at the flat line. "In 5 years, the total revenue generated from the sale of clothing items is $12,450, most of which, the records show, was purchased by Madeline Vane herself using different credit cards." A ripple of shock went through the room. $12,000 in 5 years. It was less than a hobby. It was a rounding error. The red line, I continued, tracing the plunging slope, represents operating expenses. Over the same period, the company has burned through $1.8 million. That is impossible, a voice cried out from table 4. It was Mrs. Gable, a family friend and investor. Serena just opened a showroom in Soho. I saw the pictures. Thank you for bringing that up, Mrs. Gable, I said, nodding politely. Let us look at the showroom. I clicked to the next slide. It was a split screen. On the left was an Instagram post from Serena's account, showing her sipping champagne in a white minimalist loft space with the caption, New Beginnings, Boss Babe Expansion. On the right was the rental agreement for that same address. The space was rented for 3 hours. I read from the contract. It is an event space for photo shoots. It is not a showroom. There is no lease. There is no inventory. The cost for the afternoon rental was $4,000, billed to the company as Retail Expansion Strategy. I looked at Serena. She was shaking her head violently, her hands gripping the table. It's branding, Serena shrieked, her voice cracking. You don't understand business. You have to spend money to build a brand. Let us look at what else you spent money on to build your brand, I said, ignoring her outburst. I brought up a series of scanned invoices. I scrolled through them slowly, letting the audience absorb the details. Invoice dated March 3rd, I read. 3 nights at the Ritz, Paris, $9,000, billed as fabric sourcing trip, yet there are no invoices for fabric. There are, however, receipts from the hotel spa for $1,200. Invoice dated June 12th, I continued, the rhythm of my voice relentless. Purchase of 2 Hermes Birkin bags, total cost $45,000, billed as competitor research and material analysis. I paused and looked at the audience. Those bags are currently sitting under table 1, at Serena's feet. Heads turned. Eyes darted to the floor where Serena's bag sat. It was the exact bag from the invoice. This is not a business, I stated, my voice hardening. This is a parasitic lifestyle disguised as an elaborate corporation. Serena Vane Cooter is nothing more than a shell company designed to siphon money and wash it clean for luxury consumption. The room was buzzing now. The shock was turning into anger. These people were business owners, investors, titans of industry. They respected money. They respected profit. They despised waste. And they hated being lied to. But I wasn't done. The worst was yet to come. But $1.8 million is a lot of money, I said. Even with the mortgage fraud, even with my stolen trust fund, the numbers do not add up. Where did the rest of the cash come from to keep this charade alive for 5 years? I clicked the remote one more time. The screen went black for a second. Then a logo appeared. It was a logo everyone in the room recognized. It was the logo of the Kingswell Group, my father's company, the company that half the people in this room held shares in. This, I said, is where it stops being a family tragedy and becomes a federal crime. I brought up a bank transfer record. It was complex, routed through 3 different offshore accounts before landing in Serena's business account. Madeline Vane sits on the board of the Kingswell Group Charity Fund, I said. She also has oversight of the Employee Pension Auxiliary Fund, a fund designed to support retired workers with medical emergencies. I saw 3 men at the table near the back stand up simultaneously. They were members of the Kingswell Board of Directors. Their faces were pale. They were checking their phones, likely logging into secure portals, realizing with horror that what I was saying was true. Over the last 24 months, I said, reading the figures from the screen, 22 separate transfers were made from the Pension Auxiliary Fund to an entity called Global Consulting Partners. This entity has no employees. It has no office. It has one beneficiary, Serena Vane Cooter. The total amount embezzled from the Employee Pension Fund is $650,000, I announced. The sound in the room was deafening. It wasn't applause. It wasn't laughter. It was the sound of panic. "Embezzlement!" someone shouted. "That's grand larceny!" "My God. Julian, did you know about this?" another voice roared. My father was slumped in his chair, his head in his hands. He looked like a man whose entire world had just been vaporized. He hadn't known. I could see it in his posture. He was a weak man, a negligent father, perhaps even a fraudster when pushed. But he wasn't reckless enough to steal from a pension fund. That was all Madeline. Madeline was looking around the room, her eyes wide and frantic. She saw the board members making calls. She saw the look of disgust on the faces of her friends. She saw her social standing disintegrating into dust. Serena couldn't take it anymore. She stood up, knocking her chair over. It clattered loudly against the floor. "She's lying!" Serena screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Her face was twisted, ugly with desperation. "She made it all up. She hacked the computers. She's always been jealous of me. She's jealous because Mom loves me more. She's jealous because I'm beautiful, and she's nobody." She looked at the crowd, pleading. "Don't listen to her. She's crazy. She's trying to ruin my birthday because she's a bitter, ungrateful little brat." I watched her meltdown with cold detachment. It was exactly what I had expected. The narcissist's prayer. I didn't do it. And if I did, it's not my fault. And if it is, you deserved it. Jealousy. I repeated the word into the microphone. "Is that what you think this is, Serena?" I tapped a key on the laptop. A waveform appeared on the screen, an audio file. "I anticipated this defense," I said. "I think it is important for everyone to hear exactly what you think of your business and your family when you think no one is listening." I pressed play. The speakers crackled, and then, crystal clear, came the sound of laughter. It was the distinctive, high-pitched giggle of Serena, followed by the throaty chuckle of my mother. "Oh my God, Mom, did you see her face when you told her she couldn't go to the art camp?" Serena's voice filled the room. "It was priceless," Madeline's voice replied. "She actually thought we had the budget for it. I told her we were tight this month." "Tight?" Serena laughed again. "Meanwhile, we just booked the first-class tickets to Cabo. She is such a gullible little idiot. She's literally wearing rags so I can wear Prada." The room went deadly still. The cruelty in their voices was palpable. It wasn't just greed. It was malice. They enjoyed it. They enjoyed depriving me. "Don't worry about her," Madeline said on the recording. "She is our little insurance policy. When she turns 18, we'll take out a few more loans in her name to cover the overhead on the boutique. She'll spend the rest of her life paying off our fund. It's the least she can do for the burden of raising her." "Cheers to that," Serena said. The sound of clinking glasses followed. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. Even Serena had stopped screaming. She stood there, mouth open, looking exposed and naked in her cruelty. The golden child mask had slipped, revealing the rotting wood beneath. Madeline snapped. The reality of the situation hit her. The evidence was irrefutable. Her reputation was gone. Her freedom was at risk. And the source of it all was standing on the stage, looking down at her with judge-like serenity. "You little witch!" Madeline shrieked. She moved with terrifying speed. She kicked off her heels and sprinted toward the stage. Her face was contorted, her hands curled into claws. She wasn't coming to talk. She was coming to destroy the laptop. She was coming to destroy me. "Give me that!" she screamed, rushing up the stairs. "Turn it off! Turn it off right now!" I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't even lift a hand to defend myself. I didn't have to. From the shadows on either side of the stage, two large figures emerged. They were dressed in black suits, indistinguishable from the other guests until this moment. But their movement was professional, swift, and brutal. One of them stepped in front of Madeline just as she reached the top step. He didn't strike her. He simply extended a massive arm, creating an iron bar across her path. Madeline slammed into his arm and bounced back, stumbling. "Let me through," she hissed, clawing at the guard's sleeve. "Do you know who I am? I am Madeline Vane. This is my party." "Step back." "Ma'am," the guard said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of emotion. "You are causing a disturbance." "Who hired you?" Madeline screamed, looking around wildly. "Julian, do something! Get these men out of here!" Julian didn't move. He was staring at the floor, a broken man. "I hired them," a voice cut through the chaos. Madeline froze. She turned slowly to look at the head table. Grandma Beatrice was sitting tall in her wheelchair. Her expression was one of supreme disappointment and icy resolve. "I hired private security for this evening," Beatrice said, her voice amplified by the silence of the room. "Because I suspected that when the truth finally came out, you would not handle it with dignity. It seems I was correct." Madeline looked at Beatrice, then back at me, then at the guards. She was trapped. She was powerless. For a woman who had spent her entire life controlling everything and everyone around her, it was a fate worse than death. I leaned into the microphone for the final time. "You can scream all you want, Mother," I said softly. "You can break the laptop. You can burn the screen. It does not matter." I looked at the board members, then at Serena, and finally locked eyes with Madeline. "This presentation is merely a copy," I informed them. "The original files, the bank statements, the forged signatures, the embezzlement records, and the audio recordings were compiled into a digital dossier." I checked my watch. At 8 o'clock this morning, that dossier was automatically sent via encrypted email to the regional director of the Internal Revenue Service. I paused to let that sink in. "And," I added, "to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." I saw the color drain out of the entire room. The board members were already moving toward the exits, phones pressed to their ears, desperate to distance themselves before the fallout hit. "The audit is complete," I said. "The authorities will be here shortly to collect on the debt." I closed the laptop. The screen behind me went black. The only light left in the room was the spotlight on me, and the terrified, white faces of the family that had tried to consume me. The banquet hall was no longer a place of celebration. It had transformed into an arena, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the acrid stench of ruin. My mother, Madeline, was still pinned against the edge of the stage by the security guard, her chest heaving, her hair wild and disheveled. The mask of the perfect socialite had not just cracked, it had disintegrated, revealing the snarling, desperate creature beneath. "I did it for this family," Madeline screamed, her voice raw and tearing at her throat. She wasn't looking at the crowd anymore. She was looking at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it felt like physical heat. "I did everything for us, to keep us afloat, to keep us at the top. And you ungrateful, wretched thing." She spat on the floor, a gesture so vulgar it made the woman at table 3 gasp audibly. "You are not my daughter," Madeline shrieked, the words echoing off the high, vaulted ceiling. "I should have known from the moment you were born. You are a curse. You are a devil sent to destroy everything I built. You are not one of us. You are nothing." The accusation hung in the air, vibrating with hysterical energy. It was the classic defense of a parent caught in a lie. Disown the truth-teller. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the deranged woman in velvet and the calm teenager standing in the spotlight. They were expecting the cliché. They were expecting the revelation that I was adopted, or perhaps the product of an affair my father had. The unwanted stepchild treated like Cinderella. I looked down at her from the podium. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply adjusted the microphone stand, the metal cool against my fingertips. "You are half right, Mother," I said. My voice was low, but in the dead silence of the room, it carried to every corner. Madeline froze. Her mouth hung open, her breath coming in jagged gasps. "I am a devil to you," I acknowledged. I am the retribution you never thought would come, but you are wrong about the biology. I turned back to the laptop. My fingers hovered over the keys. This was it. The financial crimes were enough to send them to prison. But what I was about to show would destroy them in a way that prison never could. It would destroy their souls. There has always been a question in this house, I said, addressing the audience. Why? Why was one sister treated like a princess, draped in silk and given the world, while the other was treated like a servant? Forced to wear hand-me-downs and pay for her own existence? Was it just favoritism? Was it just personality? I looked at my father. Julian was still sitting, staring at the floor, a broken shell of a man. I asked myself that question for years. I said to him, and then, 6 months ago, I stole hairbrushes from the bathroom. I took a glass from the sink, and I sent them to a private genetic laboratory in Switzerland. I pressed the key. The screen behind me illuminated with a stark, scientific graphic. It was a DNA profile comparison. The colors were clinical: blue for paternal markers, pink for maternal markers. Exhibit A, I announced. The biological profile of Amara Vane compared to Julian Vane and Madeline Vane. 2 bars rose on the screen, locking together perfectly. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. I read the numbers aloud. Probability of maternity, 99.999%. I looked at Madeline. I am your daughter. Mother, I am fully, biologically, undeniably yours, and I am fully, biologically, undeniably Dad's. I am a Vane. I have the blood. I have the DNA. I am the legitimate heir. A confused murmur went through the crowd. If I was the biological child, why the abuse? It didn't make sense. But, I said, cutting through the noise, if I am the biological child of this marriage, then who is Serena? I saw Serena's head snap up. Her face was blotchy, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning horror. She had never questioned her place. She was the golden child. She was the reflection of perfection. I clicked the remote. The screen changed. A new set of bars appeared. Subject: Serena Vane. Comparison: Madeline Vane. Result: match, 99.9%. Comparison: Julian Vane. Result: 0%. The silence that hit the room was instant and absolute. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the lungs of everyone present. No, Julian whispered. It was a small, pathetic sound. Serena is not your daughter. Dad, I said gently. It was the only time my voice softened. Because despite his negligence, he was the victim of this specific lie. She shares no genetic material with you. You have spent 22 years raising her, spoiling her, and funding her lifestyle. You mortgaged your home for her. You emptied your accounts for her, but she is not yours. Liar, Serena screamed. She stood up. Knocking her chair backward, she looked like a cornered animal. Daddy, don't listen to her. She faked it. I look just like you. Everyone says I look like you. You look like Mom, I corrected her. You have Mom's nose, you have Mom's chin, and you dye your hair to match Dad's shade of brown. We all know that. I turned the laser pointer to the bottom of the screen. But science does not lie, I said. And the lab was very thorough. They didn't just tell me who the father wasn't. They ran a cross-reference against the database of known associates I provided samples for. I looked at Madeline. She had stopped fighting the guard. She was sagging, her body going limp as if her skeleton had been removed. She knew what was coming. She knew the final secret was about to be ripped out of her chest. Who is he? Julian roared. He stood up, his face purple with a sudden rush of blood. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the silverware jump. Madeline! Who is he? Who is the father? Madeline didn't answer. She just stared at the floor, shaking her head mutely. She won't tell you, I said. Because the truth doesn't just ruin her marriage, it ruins her status. It ruins the myth of her aristocracy. I clicked the remote for the final time. A photo appeared on the screen next to the DNA results. It was a grainy employment photo, taken from a personnel file decades old. It showed a handsome, rough-looking man with dark eyes and a charming, crooked smile. He was wearing a uniform, a chauffeur's uniform. "Meet Arthur Miller," I introduced him. The gasp from the older guests was audible. They remembered Arthur. "He was the family driver," I said. "He worked for us for 4 years. The exact 4 years before Serena was born, he was fired suddenly, 2 months before Madeline announced her pregnancy." I looked at the data on the screen. Probability of paternity between Serena Vane and Arthur Miller, 99.9%. "You slept with the help?" The voice belonged to Mrs. Vanderwall, the doyenne of the social circle. She sounded scandalized, not by the infidelity, but by the class transgression, to these people. Sleeping with a rival billionaire was a tragedy. Sleeping with the driver was a comedy. "She didn't just sleep with him," I said. "She loved him, or at least, she loved the rebellion of it." I walked to the very edge of the stage and looked down at my mother. "That is why you hate me," I said, putting the pieces together for the audience. "It is not because I am bad. It is because I am vain." I pointed to the large portrait of Grandma Beatrice hanging on the far wall of the banquet hall. Then I pointed to myself. The resemblance was undeniable. The same sharp jawline, the same steel-gray eyes, the same posture. "I look like Beatrice," I said. "I act like Julian. I am the living, breathing reminder of the husband you grew bored of and the mother-in-law you despise. Every time you look at me, you see the Vane family, the people you think trapped you in a gilded cage." I turned my gaze to Serena, who was standing frozen, her hands covering her mouth, staring at the photo of the driver, her father. "But Serena," I continued, "Serena is Arthur's daughter. She is the child of your passion. She is the secret you kept. You worshipped her because she was yours, and yours alone. You made Dad pay for her. You made me serve her. You took the Vane family fortune and funneled it into the child of the man you had an affair with, while treating the actual Vane heir like a slave." I looked at Julian. "She cuckolded you, Dad," I said brutally, "for 22 years. She made you pay millions of dollars to raise another man's child, while she let your own daughter wear rags and go into debt." Julian turned to look at his wife. The look on his face was terrifying. It wasn't rage anymore. It was revulsion. He looked at her as if she were a roach he had found in his food. "Is it true?" Julian asked. His voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Madeline looked up. She saw the ruin in his eyes. She saw the end of her life, and finally, she snapped. "Yes!" she screamed. She pushed herself off the guard. Her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "Yes! And I would do it again!" Madeline yelled, her voice breaking into a hysterical sob. "Look at you, Julian. You are boring. You are weak. You and your mother and your endless rules about propriety and reputation. I was suffocating. Arthur made me feel alive." She pointed at Serena, who was sobbing uncontrollably. "She is better than all of you," Madeline ranted. "She has spirit. She has beauty. She deserves everything, and you." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are just like them. Cold, calculating, dead inside. I hated looking at you because you are a carbon copy of that old witch." She gestured violently toward Grandma Beatrice. "I wanted you to suffer," Madeline confessed, the words pouring out like bile. "I wanted to break you. I wanted to squeeze every drop of Vane money out of this family and give it to Serena, just to spite you all. And I almost did it. I almost won." "Almost," Grandma Beatrice said. The matriarch rolled her wheelchair forward. The crowd parted for her instantly. She moved until she was face to face with Madeline. Beatrice didn't yell. She didn't look angry. She looked incredibly, terrifyingly calm. "You are mistaken, Madeline," Beatrice said. "You almost didn't win. You never had a chance." Beatrice reached into her purse and pulled out a cell phone. She tapped the screen once. I knew about the embezzlement 3 months ago, Beatrice said casually. I knew about the mortgage fraud last week, and I have known about Arthur since the day Serena was born. He had a very distinctive chin, and unlike my son, I am not blind. Madeline stared at her, horrified. You knew? And you let me. I let you dig your own grave, Beatrice said cold-heartedly. I waited until Amara turned 18. I waited until the trust fund legally matured. I waited until you had committed enough federal crimes to ensure you would never see the outside of a prison cell again. Beatrice looked at Julian. I am sorry, my son, she said. I had to let you see it. You would never have believed me if I just told you. You had to see the numbers. You had to see the DNA. You had to hear her admit it. Julian nodded slowly. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He took off his wedding ring. He didn't throw it. He just placed it on the table with a soft clink. I want a divorce, Julian said. His voice was hollow. And I want a paternity test for Serena. Confirm it. Then I want her out of my house. Daddy, Serena wailed, reaching for him. Daddy, please, I didn't know. I'm still your daughter. I'm still your little girl. Julian stepped back, avoiding her touch, as if she were contagious. No, Julian said. You are not. You are a stranger. I have no daughter named Serena. Serena collapsed to the floor, her emerald dress pooling around her like a puddle of toxic waste. She was sobbing, a raw, ugly sound of a world shattering into a million pieces. I watched them, the mother who hated me, revealed as a fraud, the sister who tormented me, revealed as an imposter, the father who neglected me, revealed as a fool. I closed the laptop. I pulled the USB drive out. The police are downstairs, I said into the microphone. They are waiting in the lobby. I told them to give us 15 minutes for the family toast. I looked at the stunned guests, 112 of the city's elite, witnessing the total annihilation of the Vane family reputation. Thank you for coming, I said politely. Please, enjoy the cake. I hear it cost $4,000. I stepped off the stage. The spotlight followed me, but I didn't need it anymore. I walked past my sobbing sister. I walked past my shattered father. I walked past my restrained mother. I walked straight to Grandma Beatrice. She looked up at me. Her eyes, identical to mine, crinkled at the corners. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly smile. Happy birthday, Grandmother, I said. Best birthday of my life, she replied. Together. We turned our backs on the wreckage and headed for the exit. The show was over. The cleanup was just beginning. The silence that had fallen over the saint. Regis Banquet Hall was not merely the absence of noise. It was a physical pressure, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen from the lungs of the 112 guests who had come expecting champagne and canapes. Only to witness a public execution. I stood at the edge of the stage, my hand resting on the back of Grandma Beatrice's wheelchair, ready to wheel her out of this wreckage. We had said our piece. The data had been delivered. The truth was out. But Beatrice Vane was not done. She reached out a hand, her skin translucent like parchment over bone, and gripped the edge of the table. The friction of her palm against the white linen was the only sound in the cavernous room. Then, with a groan of exertion that she quickly suppressed, she pushed herself up. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I felt a jolt of genuine surprise. In the 18 years I had lived in the manor, I had never seen my grandmother stand for more than a few seconds, and never without the aid of 2 nurses. She was the invalid in the tower, the silent observer in the chair, but tonight, she stood. She was not tall, perhaps only 5 feet 2 inches, but in that moment, she seemed to loom over the room like a colossus. She straightened her spine, fighting the curvature of age, and smoothed the front of her navy wool suit. She did not look at the guests. She did not look at my father, Julian, who was staring at her with his mouth agape. She did not look at Madeline or Serena. She looked at me. Amara, she said. Her voice was no longer the raspy whisper of an old woman. It was clear, resonant, and terrifyingly steady. "How long have you known about this?" She gestured vaguely to the screen behind me, where the DNA results were still glowing in the dim light. "I suspected for years." "Grandmother," I replied, my voice matching hers in its calm. "But I only received the confirmation from the laboratory in Zurich 3 days ago." Beatrice nodded slowly. It was a curt, sharp movement. 3 days, she repeated, "and in 3 days, you compiled a forensic audit, hacked a secured server, arranged for private security, and dismantled a 20-year conspiracy." "I had to be thorough," I said. "I knew who I was dealing with." "Good," Beatrice said. A ghost of a smile touched her thin lips. "You are efficient. You are ruthless. You are a vain." Then, the smile vanished. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. As she slowly, deliberately turned her head to face the stage left, where the security guard was still blocking Madeline's path. Madeline was panting, her chest heaving beneath the velvet gown. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was a mess, but her eyes were still wild with a cornered, feral defiance. She looked at Beatrice, and for the first time that night, she looked truly small. Beatrice did not scream. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She spoke with the quiet, absolute authority of a monarch addressing a traitor. "You," Beatrice said. The word hit Madeline like a physical slap. "You stood in my house. You ate at my table. You spent my son's fortune. And all the while, you were laughing." Madeline started to speak, but Beatrice cut her off with a sharp lift of her hand. "Silence," Beatrice commanded. "You do not have permission to speak. You have forfeited that right." Beatrice took a step forward. It was a small, shuffling step, but it carried the momentum of a landslide. "I could forgive the greed," Beatrice said, her tone conversational, which made it all the more chilling. "I could perhaps even forgive the embezzlement. Money is replaceable. We are vains. We can always make more money. But what I cannot forgive, what I will never forgive, is the pollution of my legacy." She pointed a shaking finger at Serena, who was still huddled on the floor, weeping into her hands. "You brought a mongrel into the lion's den," Beatrice said, the archaic, brutal insult landing with sickening weight. "You passed off the spawn of a chauffeur as a Kingswell heir. You gave her the education, the opportunities, and the love that belonged by blood and by right to Amara." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "You took the true heir to the Kingswell empire, and you made her a servant to a bastard. You made a vain bow to a miller. You inverted the natural order of my world." Madeline flinched. The social humiliation of having her infidelity exposed was one thing, but this was different. Beatrice was stripping away the last shreds of Madeline's justification. She wasn't a clever survivor. She was a parasite who had tried to replace the host. "I suspected," Beatrice admitted, addressing the room at large. "I suspected from the moment Serena was born. She lacked the spark. She lacked the intelligence. She was too loud, too desperate for attention. She was common." She looked at Julian. "I tried to tell you, my son, do you remember? When Serena was 5, I told you she did not look like us. I told you she did not act like us. You called me a bitter old woman. You said I was jealous of your happiness." Julian put his head in his hands. "I'm sorry, Mother," he moaned. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry does not fix the mortgage, Julian," Beatrice snapped. "And it does not give Amara back her childhood." She turned back to Madeline. "But I had no proof," Beatrice continued. "I could not destroy my son's marriage on a hunch. I needed evidence. And you, in your infinite stupidity, gave it to us." Madeline looked up, confusion warring with fear in her eyes. "What?" "The invoice," Beatrice said. "That ridiculous, petty, malicious spreadsheet you created. The bill for raising Amara." Beatrice laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You were so obsessed with squeezing every last cent out of Amara, so obsessed with humiliating her, that you forced her to look at the numbers. You forced her to examine the finances. If you had just left her alone, if you had just let her go quietly, you might have gotten away with it for another decade. But you got greedy. You tried to charge her for the privilege of being abused. I watched my mother's face as the realization hit her. She had engineered her own destruction. The spreadsheet, her great weapon, her lesson in gratitude, had been the map that led me straight to the buried bodies. And now, Beatrice said, straightening up to her full height, we come to the sentencing. She looked at the antique grandfather clock that stood in the corner of the hall. It is currently 9 o'clock, Beatrice announced. You have exactly 1 hour. 1 hour for what? Madeline whispered, her voice trembling. 1 hour to vacate my property, Beatrice said. You and your daughter. Oh, but where will we go? Madeline stammered. This is my home. I have lived here for 25 years. It was never your home, Beatrice corrected her. It was your hunting ground, and now, the hunt is over. Beatrice turned to the security guards. Escort Mrs. Vane and Miss Miller to the estate, she instructed. They are allowed to enter the house for exactly 60 minutes. They may pack 1 suitcase each. That suitcase may contain clothing and personal toiletries only. Clothing? Madeline screeched. What about my jewelry? What about my art? My furs? The jewelry was purchased with Vane money, Beatrice said coldly. The art was purchased with Vane money. The furs were purchased with money stolen from the Employee Pension Fund. Those are assets of the Kingswell Group, and they will be liquidated to repay the debts you have incurred. You can't do this, Serena cried out from the floor, looking up with mascara-stained cheeks. Grandma, please, I have nothing. I don't have any money. Then I suggest you ask your father for a loan, Beatrice said, nodding toward the photo of the driver on the screen. Although I hear Arthur is currently working as a mechanic in New Jersey, so do not expect much. Julian! Madeline screamed, turning to my father. Are you going to let her do this? I am your wife. Serena is the child you raised. You can't just throw us on the street. Julian looked up. His eyes were red, rimmed with dark circles. He looked at the woman he had worshipped for decades, and then he looked at the DNA test on the screen. He looked at the mortgage fraud documents. He looked at me, standing stoically in the spotlight. Mother is being generous, Julian said. His voice was dead, flat. If it were up to me, I wouldn't even give you the hour. Madeline gasped. The last pillar of her support had crumbled. But you are not going alone, I interjected. I stepped forward, reclaiming the attention of the room. Grandmother is evicting you from the house, but I have made arrangements for your next accommodation. I pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed a single button. Now, I said into the phone, at the back of the banquet hall. The double doors burst open with a loud, authoritative crash. The room turned. Marching through the doors were 6 officers in dark blue windbreakers. On the back of each jacket, in bold yellow letters, was written, Economic Crimes Unit. They were not regular beat cops. They were the specialized task force dealing with high-level fraud, embezzlement, and corporate theft. They moved with a speed and precision that made the security guards look like amateurs. Leading them was a stern-faced detective holding a sheaf of papers. I nodded to him. We had spoken on the phone 3 times that morning. Madeline Vane, the detective barked, scanning the room. Madeline shrank back against the stage, her face draining of all blood until she looked like a wax figure. No, she whimpered. No, no, no. The detective marched straight up to the stage. He didn't offer a polite greeting. He didn't ask if she was having a good evening. Madeline Vane, he repeated, reaching for his belt. I have a warrant for your arrest on 12 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of identity theft, 1 count of bank fraud, and 1 count of embezzlement from a regulated pension fund. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. They glinted silver under the chandeliers. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back, the detective ordered. You can't arrest me, Madeline shrieked, backing away until she hit the podium. I am a Vane. We are important people. We have lawyers. Julian, Call the lawyers." The detective didn't have time for hysterics. He grabbed Madeline's wrist, spun her around with practiced efficiency, and snapped the cuff onto her right wrist. Click! The sound was louder than the microphone feedback had been. It was the sound of reality crashing down. "Get off me!" Madeline screamed, thrashing like a fish on a hook. "This is a mistake. My daughter is lying. She hacked the computers. It's a setup." "You have the right to remain silent," the detective recited, snapping the second cuff onto her left wrist. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Amara!" Madeline screamed, her head whipping around to look at me. Her eyes were bulging. Tell them it's a joke. Tell them you made it up. I'm your mother. You can't send your mother to prison." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had charged me $3,000 for a car accident I didn't cause. I looked at the woman who had forged my signature to steal my future. "You taught me that actions have costs, Mother," I said calmly. "Consider this the bill coming due." The detective signaled to his officers. Two of them moved toward Serena. "Serena Miller?" one of the officers asked. Serena scrambled backward on the floor, crab walking away from them. "I didn't do anything. I didn't sign anything. It was all her. It was all Mom." "We have questions regarding your knowledge of the shell companies used to launder the stolen funds," the officer said. "You are not under arrest at this moment, but we strongly suggest you accompany us to the station for questioning, unless you want us to obtain a warrant for you as an accomplice." Serena looked at Madeline, who was currently being frog-marched down the stairs by the detective. She looked at the guests, who were filming the entire scene on their phones. She looked at the officer. She stood up, shaking, and lowered her head. She didn't fight. She was too cowardly to fight without her mother to protect her. The procession moved through the banquet hall. Madeline was still shouting, her obscenities echoing off the walls, blaming everyone from the president to the catering staff. Serena walked a few paces behind, weeping silently. As they passed the head table, Madeline lunged toward Julian, but the detective yanked her back. "Julian!" she howled. "Fix this!" Julian didn't look up. He was staring at his empty ring finger. They reached the doors. The detective paused and looked back at me. I gave him a small nod of appreciation. He tipped his head in return, then shoved the doors open. They disappeared into the night. The flashing lights of the police cruisers washed over the hallway, blue and red strobes cutting through the elegance of the hotel. Then, the doors swung shut. The silence returned, but this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clean. It was the silence of a storm that had finally broken. Grandma Beatrice took a deep breath. She adjusted her suit jacket. She looked around the room at the stunned guests, who were frozen in their seats, unsure if they should applaud or flee. "Well," Beatrice said, her voice clear and bright, "that concludes the entertainment portion of the evening." She turned to the waiter standing nearest to her, a young man who looked like he was about to faint. "Young man," Beatrice said, "I believe there is a cake. Please cut it. I find that justice gives me quite an appetite." She looked at me. Her eyes were fierce, proud, and undeniably vain. "Come, Amara," she said. "Sit. We have much to discuss regarding the restructuring of the company." I walked over to the table. I pulled out the chair that had been reserved for Madeline, the seat of honor at the right hand of the matriarch. I sat down. "Yes, grandmother," I said. "Let's get to work." The exodus from the saint. Regis had been swift. Once the police cruisers had departed, flashing lights painting the hotel facade in a rhythmic wash of red and blue, the guests had scattered like cockroaches exposed to sudden light. There were no polite goodbyes. There were no promises to catch up soon. There was only the hurried scratching of chairs against the floor, the rustle of silk and taffeta, and the frantic tapping of thumbs against phone screens as 112 members of the elite raced to control the narrative before the morning papers hit the stands. By the time the sleek black town car pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Vane estate, the clock on the dashboard read 11:30 at night. The house was dark, For as long as I could remember, Madeline had insisted that every window in the manor be illuminated until midnight. A beacon of prosperity meant to intimidate the neighbors. But tonight, the windows were black, staring out at the grounds like the empty sockets of a skull. The staff, sensing the seismic shift in the hierarchy, had likely retreated to their quarters or simply gone home. The silence that greeted us as the car engine died was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of rest. It was the stunned, hollow silence of a battlefield after the cannons have ceased firing. I helped Grandma Beatrice out of the car. She was tired, her movements slower than they had been during her electrifying performance at the banquet, but her grip on my arm was iron. We entered the foyer, the sound of our footsteps echoing on the marble. "Go to him," Beatrice said softly, nodding toward the rear of the house. "I will be in the study." She did not need to tell me who she meant. I walked through the darkened hallway, past the formal dining room where we had endured so many suffocating meals, past the salon where Madeline had held court with her sycophants. I opened the French doors that led to the back terrace. My father, Julian, was sitting on a stone bench overlooking the rose garden. He was still wearing his tuxedo, but the bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose he had managed to slip. He was not smoking. He was not drinking. He was simply sitting, his hands clasped between his knees, staring into the darkness where the manicured hedges merged with the night. I approached him slowly. The gravel crunched beneath my heels, a harsh sound that made him flinch. He did not turn around, but I saw his shoulders stiffen. "Is it true?" he asked. His voice was rough, as if he had been screaming for hours, though I knew he hadn't spoken a word since we left the hotel. "About the mortgage? About the house?" "Yes," I said. Stopping a few feet away, I didn't sit next to him. I stood, keeping the distance that had defined our relationship for 18 years. The foreclosure notices would have started arriving next month. She intercepted the mail. I found the hidden stack in her dressing room closet. Julian let out a long, shuddering breath. "I thought I was being a provider," he whispered. "I thought I was working hard to give them everything, and the whole time, she was stripping the copper out of the walls." He turned his head to look at me then. In the pale moonlight, he looked ancient. The dashing industrialist, the man on the cover of Forbes, was gone. In his place was a man who had been hollowed out by 22 years of deception. "I am sorry, Amara," he said. The words hung in the cold air. It was the first time I had ever heard him say them to me. "I was a coward," he continued, his eyes wet. "I saw how she treated you. I saw the way she looked at you with that cold, sneering hatred. And I told myself it was just a personality clash. I told myself it was normal for mothers and daughters to fight. I told myself anything that would allow me to go back to my office and ignore the war in my own living room." "You ignored it because it was easier," I said. My voice was not angry, merely factual. "Serena was easy. She was bubbly. She was demanding. She played the part you wanted. I was difficult. I was quiet. I watched you." "You terrified me," Julian admitted. He looked down at his hands. "You have your grandmother's eyes. Every time I looked at you, I felt like I was being judged. I felt like you could see right through me, see how weak I was. Serena made me feel like a king. She asked for things, and I gave them, and she cheered. It was a simple transaction. But you never asked for anything. You just endured." He paused, swallowing hard against a lump in his throat. "I knew," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Deep down, in the parts of my mind I refused to visit, I think I knew she wasn't mine. She didn't have the temper. She didn't have the mind. But I felt guilty. I thought if I loved her enough, if I bought her enough, it would make it true. And I thought if I ignored you, the guilt of failing you would go away. He looked up at me again, and tears were finally spilling over his cheeks. "But I was proud of you," he said. "When you won the state math competition, when you got into the advanced placement program, I never said it because Madeline would fly into a rage if I praised you, but I was proud. I used to keep the newspaper clippings in my desk drawer at the office. It was a beautiful sentiment. It was the kind of confession that, in a movie, would lead to a tearful embrace and an immediate healing of all wounds. But this was not a movie. This was a balance sheet of emotional debt that had accrued for 18 years. A few clippings in a desk drawer did not offset a lifetime of neglect. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. I kept my hands at my sides. "But pride requires action. Dad, you let her steal my future. You let her isolate me. You let her treat me like a servant in my own heritage. You were the adult. You were the father. Your job was to protect me, not to hide in your office." Julian nodded, accepting the blow. He didn't argue. He didn't try to defend himself. "I know," he said. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. Forgiveness is an investment," I told him, using the language he understood best. "And right now, your credit rating with me is 0. It will take time to rebuild. A lot of time. Maybe years." I took a step closer, my shadow falling over him. "But," I added, softening my tone just a fraction, "at least the books are open now. At least there are no more lies. We can start from 0. 0 is better than a deficit." Julian looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes. He nodded. 0, he repeated. "I can work with 0. He reached out a hand, tentatively, as if he expected me to slap it away. I didn't take it, but I didn't pull back. I let his hand rest in the air between us for a moment before he slowly lowered it. "Go inside, Dad," I said. "It's cold, and you have a meeting with the bankruptcy lawyers at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." He let out a weak, dry chuckle. "You really are your grandmother's granddaughter." "Yes," I said. "I am." I left him in the garden and walked around the side of the house toward the front gate. I needed to see it finished. I needed to see the final entry in the ledger. The main gates of the estate were 12 feet high, wrought iron spikes topped with gold leaf. Outside, on the cobblestone pavement, a solitary figure sat on a Louis Vuitton suitcase. Serena. She was still wearing the emerald dress, but the hem was muddy where it dragged on the ground. She had wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the night air. The security guards had followed Beatrice's orders to the letter. She had been given 1 hour to pack. She had her clothes. She had her toiletries. And she had nothing else. I stood in the shadows of the gatehouse, watching her through the bars. She didn't see me. She was holding her phone to her ear, the screen illuminating her tear-streaked face. "Jessica?" she said, her voice high and desperate. "Jessica, please pick up. It's Serena. Listen, there was a huge misunderstanding at the party. My crazy sister hacked the Jessica? Hello?" She pulled the phone away. The call had been disconnected. She dialed again. Her fingers were shaking so hard she mistyped the number twice. "Tiffany!" she cried out when the next call connected. "Oh my God. Thank God. Tiff, I need a favor. I need a place to crash just for tonight. My dad is having a mental breakdown and kicked everyone out." "What? No, it's not true. The news is lying. Tiff, I bought you that bracelet for your birthday. It cost $5,000. Tiff, don't you hang up on me." The line went dead. Serena stared at the phone. The realization was washing over her, slow and cold. The entourage, the squad, the best friends forever. They weren't friends with Serena Miller, the chauffeur's daughter. They were friends with Serena Vane, the heiress to the Kingswell fortune, without the name, without the credit card, without the access. She was nothing to them. She was a liability. She screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of frustration, and she hurled the phone onto the pavement. It shattered, the glass screen spiderwebbing into 1,000 pieces. Now she truly had nothing. She sat there for another minute, sobbing into her knees. Then, slowly, she stood up. She grabbed the handle of the heavy suitcase. She looked back at the house, the only home she had ever known, the kingdom she thought she ruled. She looked at the dark windows. She turned around and began to walk. The wheels of the suitcase rumbled loudly on the asphalt, a lonely grinding sound that faded as she disappeared down the long, dark road leading toward the city. She had no money, she had no car, she had no family. She was walking into a world she was completely unprepared to survive in. I watched until she was gone. Until the sound of the wheels was swallowed by the wind, I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I just felt a quiet sense of completion. The error had been corrected. The glitch had been removed from the system. I turned back to the house. Grandma Beatrice was waiting for me in the library. It was a room I had been forbidden to enter as a child, a sanctuary of leather-bound books and the smell of pipe tobacco. Beatrice sat behind the massive oak desk that had belonged to my grandfather. A single green-shaded lamp cast a pool of light on the desktop. In the center of that light sat a heavy, iron key. "She is gone?" Beatrice asked without looking up. She was reviewing a stack of documents, a magnifying glass in her hand. "She is gone," I confirmed, walking toward the highway. "Good," Beatrice said. She closed the folder she was reading and placed the magnifying glass down. She looked at me, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Sit down. Amara?" I sat in the leather chair opposite her. It was too big for me, but I sat straight, refusing to be swallowed by it. "The police will hold Madeline for at least 48 hours before arraignment," Beatrice said. "With the flight risk she poses, bail will be set in the millions. She won't be able to pay it. She will remain in custody until the trial. Julian is a mess, but he will sign whatever we put in front of him, effectively. The board of directors is leaderless." She pushed the iron key across the desk toward me. It scraped against the wood. "This is the key to the family vault," Beatrice said, "and effectively, the key to the Kingswell Group. You have proven yourself tonight. You have the mind. You have the spine. You are the only one in this family with the requisite ruthlessness to cut out the rot and save the business." She leaned back. "I am old, Amara. I cannot run the company. I want you to take over. I want you to be the interim CEO. You will have a regent board to advise you until you finish university. But the decisions will be yours. The power will be yours." I looked at the key. It was heavy, cold, and ancient. It represented billions of dollars. It represented power, influence, and the ultimate victory over everyone who had ever doubted me. It was everything Madeline had killed for. It was everything Serena had pretended to have. And it was sitting right there, within my reach. I reached out and placed my hand over the key. I felt the metal bite into my palm. Then, I slid it back across the desk. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "You refuse?" "I am 18 years old. Grandmother," I said. "I have spent my entire life in survival mode. I have spent every waking hour analyzing, calculating, and planning for this one night. I have been playing a game of chess against my own mother since I was 6. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the dark garden where my father was still sitting. "If I take the company now," I said, "I become them. I become obsessed with the legacy, with the money, with the image. I don't want to be Madeline, and I don't want to be Julian." I turned back to face her. "I have a scholarship waiting for me," I said. "I have a path. I want to study forensic accounting. I want to become a certified auditor. I want to work for the government, or maybe a private firm. I want to hunt down people like Madeline, not just for revenge, but because I'm good at it. I enjoy it." Beatrice stared at me. For a long moment. The room was silent. I wondered if I had disappointed her. I wondered if she would banish me too. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. "You don't want the crown," Beatrice mused. "You want the sword." "The crown is heavy," I said. "The sword cuts through the lies." "Very well," Beatrice said. She picked up the key and slipped it into her pocket. "I will appoint an interim CEO, a boring man in a gray suit who will do exactly what I tell him. You go to university, you get your degree, you sharpen your sword." She looked at me with a fierce pride that warmed me more than the fireplace ever could. "But remember, Amara," she said, "this house is yours. This name is yours. When you are ready, when you have hunted enough monsters, the throne will be waiting." "Thank you, grandmother," I said. I walked to the door. I paused with my hand on the brass knob. "Go to sleep, Amara," Beatrice said, picking up her pen again. "Tomorrow is a new fiscal year." "Good night, grandmother," I replied. I walked out of the library and climbed the grand staircase. I walked past Serena's room, the door open, revealing the chaos of her hasty departure. I walked past Madeline's room, dark and silent. I entered my room. It was small, sparse, and clean. It was the room of a ghost, but as I lay down on the narrow bed, staring up at the ceiling, I realized I wasn't a ghost anymore. For the first time in my life, the house was quiet, the debt was paid, the ledger was balanced, and as I closed my eyes, I slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the solvent. The gavel struck the mahogany block with a sound that was final, decisive, and oddly hollow. It was the sound of a closing bracket on a long, complicated equation. 3 months had passed since the banquet at the St. Regis. The autumn leaves in Central Park had turned from vibrant green to a bruised purple, and finally to a brittle, skeletal brown. The city was preparing for winter, tightening its coat against the coming chill. But inside the Federal District Court of Southern New York, the temperature was already freezing. I sat in the back row of the gallery. I was dressed in a charcoal gray suit, tailored to perfection, invisible and professional. I was not there as a daughter. I was there as a witness to the conclusion of the audit. My mother, Madeline Vane, stood before the bench. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with her pale, unmakeupped skin. Her hair, once a chemically structured helmet of blonde ambition, hung limp and gray around her face. She looked smaller, without the shoulder pads, without the heels, without the terrified deference of her family. She was just a middle-aged woman who had stolen money she did not earn. "Madeline Vane," the judge read from the sentencing document. "On the count of wire fraud, you are sentenced to 60 months in a federal correctional facility. On the count of embezzlement, you are sentenced to 60 months, to be served concurrently." 5 years. Madeline did not cry. She did not scream. She simply stared at the judge with eyes that were dead and hard, like stones found at the bottom of a dry riverbed. She still did not believe she had done anything wrong. In her mind, the laws of the United States were just another set of annoying social rules she should have been exempt from. As the bailiffs led her away, she turned her head. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing the empty seats where her friends would have sat, bypassing the empty seat where her husband would have sat. Her gaze landed on me. For a second, I thought she would curse me. I thought she would scream that I was a devil, a changeling, a mistake, but she didn't. She just looked at me with a mixture of confusion and fear. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that I was the only person in the world who truly saw her. I had seen her ledger. I had seen her red ink, and I had balanced it. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind her. The hearing was over. I stood up, smoothed the creases in my trousers, and walked out into the crisp November air. I checked my watch. It was 11:30 in the morning. I had time. I hailed a taxi. "Jersey City," I told the driver. "The Starlight Diner on Route 4. The drive took 45 minutes. We crossed the bridge, leaving the gleaming spires of Manhattan behind for the industrial gray sprawl of New Jersey. The Starlight Diner was a chrome and neon relic from the 50s that smelled of old grease and despair. I didn't go inside. I didn't want a confrontation. I just wanted verification. I stood across the street, watching through the large plate glass window. The lunch rush was beginning. Waitresses in pink uniforms were rushing back and forth, balancing trays of burgers and shakes. And there she was, Serena. She was working Section 3, near the kitchen doors. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, secured with a cheap plastic clip. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, mostly because she could no longer afford concealer. I watched as a customer. A large man in a trucking cap waved his empty coffee cup at her aggressively. Serena flinched. I saw her mouth the words, "I'm coming." "Sir." She hurried over, pot in hand, and poured the coffee. Her hand shook slightly, spilling a few drops onto the table. The man yelled. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I saw the body language. He pointed at the spill. He pointed at her. In the old life, Serena would have thrown the pot at him. She would have screamed, called her daddy, and had the man fired from his job. But in this life, Serena Miller took a rag from her apron pocket. She bowed her head. She wiped the table. She apologized. She looked broken. But strangely, she also looked real. For the first time in 22 years, she was earning her existence. She was trading labor for capital. It was a harsh lesson, and she was learning it late. But she was learning it. I watched her for 5 minutes. Then, I turned away. I did not feel pity. I did not feel gloating. I felt the satisfaction of a column that finally added up. The error had been corrected. I got back into the taxi. "Take me to Midtown," I said. "Viridian Plaza." My new office was on the 42nd floor. It was not a corner office. I was only a junior associate. After all, but it had a window that looked out over the Hudson River. The desk was sleek glass. The chair was ergonomic mesh. Everything in the room was earned. My degree, my certification, my job. There was no nepotism here. Viridian was a forensic accounting firm that ate the weak for breakfast. And I was thriving. I sat down at my computer and woke the screen. There was a new email in my inbox. The subject line was blank. The sender was simply, "Julian." I opened it. There was no text, no long, rambling apology, no pleas for reconciliation. Just an attachment. It was a photograph. It showed a small, battered wooden boat bobbing on a lake somewhere in upstate New York. The water was still and gray, reflecting the overcast sky. Sitting in the stern of the boat, wearing a thick wool sweater and a fishing hat that looked like it had been chewed by a dog. Was my father? He was holding up a fish. It was a small bass, nothing impressive, but the smile on his face was genuine. It was the smile of a boy who had played hooky from school. He looked 10 years younger than the man who had sat in the garden 3 months ago. Julian Vane had sold the estate. He had sold the cars. He had liquidated the remaining assets of the Kingswell Group to pay off the creditors and the fines levied by the SEC. He was not a billionaire anymore. He wasn't even a millionaire. He was just a man with a small pension, a small apartment in Buffalo, and a fishing boat. He was free. I smiled. A small, private thing. I hit reply. I typed 2 words. "Nice catch." I pressed send. Then, I turned my attention to the final task. I minimized my email and opened my personal drive. There, sitting on the desktop, was a single file. The underscore, cost underscore, of underscore raising underscore Amara, XLSX. It was the file I had recovered from Madeline's laptop. The file she had presented at the birthday party. The file that listed every diaper, every meal, every breath I had taken as a debt to be repaid. I opened it one last time. I scrolled through the rows. Row 400, orthodontics, $5,000. Row 600, summer camp, $2,000. Row 1000, room and board, prorated, $80,000. The final total at the bottom was bold and red, $342,751. Madeline had wanted me to sign a promissory note for this amount. She had wanted to own me. I opened my banking app on the other screen. I had recovered the trust fund. Grandma Beatrice had forced the board to reinstate it with interest before she stepped down. I had also received a significant signing bonus from Viridian, and my consulting fee for the Kingswell audit had been substantial. I had money, but this wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. I navigated to the transfer page. I selected a recipient. the Julian Vane Foundation for Financial Literacy. It was a small charity I had set up in my father's name last week. Its mission was to teach foster children how to manage money, how to avoid predatory loans, and how to protect their credit scores. I typed in the amount, $499,000. It was the amount of the bill Madeline had presented, plus reasonable interest, plus a tip for the inconvenience. I hovered my finger over the confirm button. You wanted to know what I was worth. Mother, I whispered to the empty office. You wanted a return on your investment. I clicked. Transfer complete. The money was gone. I was lighter. I didn't owe them a cent. I didn't owe them a thank you. I didn't owe them a visit on Christmas. The transaction was settled. I turned back to the Excel file. I selected all rows. I selected all columns. I hit delete. The numbers vanished. The grid was white and clean. I went to File. I went to Delete. A dialog box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently delete the _cost of _raising _amara.x LSX? This action cannot be undone. I looked at the prompt. I thought about the girl who had worn hand-me-downs. I thought about the teenager who had been framed for shoplifting. I thought about the daughter who had been an ATM machine for a sister who wasn't even her blood. They were gone. That girl was a depreciated asset. I was the new venture. I am sure, I said. I clicked yes. The icon disappeared from my desktop. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was beginning to set over New Jersey, casting long golden shadows across the Hudson River. The city was waking up, lights flickering on in the skyscrapers around me like a field of electric stars. I pressed my hand against the cool glass. I was alone. I had no parents to go home to. I had no sister to call. To some, that might look like loneliness. But to an auditor? To someone who knows that every liability must be cleared before you can calculate true equity? It didn't look like loneliness. It looked like freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the recycled air of the office, which tasted sweeter than the champagne at the St. Regis ever had. Mother wanted to calculate my value in dollars and cents, I said, my voice serving as the final narration of this chapter of my life. She thought she could send me an invoice for my own life. But she forgot the most basic rule of business, the one rule that every fraudster eventually learns the hard way. Never try to cheat the person who keeps the books. I picked up my bag and headed for the door. My bill is paid, I said, flipping the light switch. The office went dark, save for the glow of the city outside. And the change is my future. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Amara and her fight for justice. This has been a journey through betrayal, numbers, and the ultimate payback. If you are listening to this on YouTube, please scroll down to the comments section right now. I want to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Are you listening from your bedroom in London, on a bus in Saigon, or maybe taking a break at work in New York? Let me know in the comments below. And here's my final message to you. If you are in a situation where toxic family members are trying to control you with money, remember this story. Keep your receipts. Track your value. You are not a debt to be repaid. You are the creditor of your own life. Please smash that like button if you enjoyed Amara's victory. Subscribe to BitterSweet Drama Stories for more tales of revenge and redemption, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Until next time, stay solvent and stay strong.